Click the links to join the channel here or over on Subscribestar. So Alec Baldwin and the Rust Armor, that was the film. The setting was out in the desert somewhere, a low-budget film, cowboy type of thing. So they're using period-accurate hardware devices from 200 years ago, which is unfortunate because those things are harder to check for safety than more modern devices. So they're both gonna face some charges after a girl was fatally injured. A woman was fatally injured on the set, and I think the director already pled out to something. So Hollywood and guns is a really bad combination. And I think the only good that can come out of this is that if Hollywood learns a lesson and they stop using real hardware, I'm sure they're all on board with authenticity. But in terms of safety, like, it's Hollywood, it's the land of make-believe. You're telling me they can't use something fake and still make it look somewhat believable? So what happened was he, as he said in later interviews, which I really wonder why he did these interviews, because he effectively, what happened is, like, well, he had the hardware in his hand, and a woman standing 10 feet away from him was fatally injured due to that hardware he had in his hand. It's like, you can't at that point say, well, I didn't pull the trigger, and then later in the interview saying, like, oh, okay, well, I pulled the hammer back. Okay, well, what do you think was a probable likely outcome of that? You had the hammer pulled back, and it was pointed in the direction, and it was loaded. If all those three things line up, then you're going to get somebody fatally injured, and that's exactly what happened. So, like, you're in a real tough position here. So why didn't he check the cylinder? Why didn't he check the hardware itself? Well, that deals with the period authenticity. The movie set in the 18 whatevers, and the evolution of how cylinders for revolvers work. That the revolver you have by your bedside, if you have a revolver and not an auto, is standard 38 Smith & Wesson. You press a button, a cylinder release, and it pops out the side, and then you pull the rod or push the rod, and it like the locking mechanism pops out, and like all 6 shells can fall out, be released at once. That's the standard that everyone is familiar with, is that side break design. British have got like a Webley I'm somewhat familiar with, where it's a top break, and honestly, it's not as great a design, because when you top break it, the hammer starts to rise. It's kind of a weird. The cylinder's not connected, but you see the hammer rise, what looks like all by itself. It's like, oh, this is looking very creepy. But those, you're able to break the cylinder out instantly and dump all 6 shells instantly, or at least check to see that they're holes and they're not filled with anything. Those are much safer designs than these older, the design is like 200 years old. It's like these are different. So these have cylinders that are more locked into place. You have to like unscrew a rod to get the cylinder out. So what they have is loading gates, where you've got to rotate the thing 5 or 6 times, depending on how many cylinders, how many shells it takes, to check through the loading gates, and then pop a rod 6 times to make sure that you've ejected it. So it's a little bit more of an ordeal, but you're handed something. It's not a prop. It's a real working. Say it's a 45 for example. That's a real working piece of hardware that you're handed. It's like, what do you instantly do? Point it in a safe direction, make sure it's unloaded. You're on the set or you're in real life, and you're using this thing for a prop. It's like, that's immediately point it in a safe direction and make sure it's unloaded. That's stage 1. He didn't do that because clearly it was loaded. So then there's something where it can be loaded, and it can be loaded with real shells, and then it can be loaded with blanks, which also have powder in them, and they have the firing chemical under the primer. That's the first thing that's struck, and it starts combustion that spreads to the powder. So a blank can still be fatal. It still has powder. It's like, it might have powder sufficient to propel something to 500 feet per second, which at close range is still fatal, where if it had a full charge, it would go to like 1,200 feet per second. Who knows? But just because it's a blank, it doesn't mean it's harmless, and that's on the property, the armorer and the property managers, to very carefully explain that to people, to explain all this to people, like over and over again until they get it. And then there's these are dummy shells, which don't have any powder in them, but they're designed to look like real shells. So when it's in the cylinder and you need to film the cylinder, the camera is picking up that there is something in there. It's not. It just, you want to make sure that it's like a continuity error or some kind of error in a movie where it'd be like somebody holding an auto without a magazine at the bottom, and like you didn't see that something like that. It's a little mistake where you're looking through a cylinder and you see like, oh, okay, the cylinder's empty. It's like, that's why they put dummy shells in them. Thing is, all he had to do was pop out all the shells that were potentially in the cylinder, remove all 6, and then at least the cylinder is empty. There might still be a barrel obstruction, but that is something else. That's why you with regular devices, whether they're auto or cylinders, you make sure that the thing is empty, and then you rack the slide back, lock it back, and then you can look through the receiver out through the muzzle, and you see you shine a flashlight through it, and you see there's no barrel obstructions, and you can do the same thing with revolvers. It's just kind of like basic standard 101, but it's like that's on the somebody has to tell the actors this, because the actors aren't. I don't know if they're as familiar. I mean, every actor, like, they all have the same stuff, the hardware on their bedside, but like, are they familiar with the safety aspects of it, like with the things I just went over, or are their egos kind of so big that they don't really go in tune with that? And there are some people you meet, especially where this kind of hardware is used, where there's some people who have kind of an oppositional defiance disorder. They don't like to be told what to do. But this is something different. This is like showing somebody how to use an axe or a chainsaw, or what these are, these Liberty devices, where there's no second chances. It's like this is how you safely swing an axe. This is how you safely use an axe. The minimum amount of force to get it to break the wood. You don't just, you're not going crazy with the thing. It's like, because there's no second chances with an axe. If you miss, you're gonna be missing part of your body. Same with a chainsaw, and same with this kind of stuff. And there's some people who, like, you explain this to them, and they immediately want to do something stupid with it, like point it at you or point it at themselves, because they don't, like, they're just wired differently. And if you're an armor on the set with somebody like that, you go, okay, I'm gonna have to walk away now, because this is insane. Anyway, so the other thing you could have done, which would have been a little bit weird, but also would have been the better decision, would you go, okay, everyone please cover their ears, I'm going to point the muzzle down and pull the trigger 6 times. And the worst that happens, if the thing is unloaded, you damage the firing pin, but who cares? It's a prop gun. You can fix it afterwards. Or one of those 6 times, or all those 6 times, a bullet goes into the dirt and you save somebody's life. And then you sit down and go, okay, we have to have a discussion, because there's this thing is loaded, and you scare the piss out of everybody by firing into the dirt, but you save a life. It's like, okay, well, the armor needs to be fired immediately, and we need to reassess why we're using, like, clearly if a mistake like that, which almost could have been fatal, it could have been avoided with some of the things I suggested. It's like, Hollywood doesn't know that, especially on a small budget with a set of Rust. Anyway, so the bigger issue is that Hollywood is not capable of using real hardware, because Hollywood is a bunch of nose candy, snorting weirdos who have egos too big to be told what to do. It takes a strong, confident expert with the props and the hardware who can lay down the law. And if the actors are not listening, or they're a little too, cavalier about the rules, or they don't like taking instructions from someone who's just just an armorer, but it's like, well, for that position, he has to be the boss. You have to listen to him. Or the set is dangerous and they're just not taking it seriously. Then you have to be confident enough to quit. And that takes some balls to walk away from a multi-million-dollar project, but it's also better to do that and save somebody's life, and more people are going to respect you for that. And then they have to shut down the set and get another armor, and then they learn their lessons, like, okay, we have to treat this person with respect, even if we don't like being told what to do. It's like, yes, but you're being instructed what to do with something that you're not familiar with. But it takes a producer to hire that person, who the producer has to have to know what they're doing, to hire somebody who is experienced in this kind of thing, whether it's an axe, a chainsaw, or a pistol. And a girl in her 20s is not the person to be in charge of the hardware. And when the story came out, I was looking at her social media. She looks like a nut job in her 20s. Especially if they're doing stuff like this thing was, I don't know, set in the Nevada desert somewhere, and they built up a set, a bunch of false fronts and a couple of interior sets. Like, they film everything there. They got bathrooms and trailers. It's kind of, it's kind of neat. You go to one area, you build a half a dozen fake buildings or fronts, and everyone's on trailers, and it's like you just camped out there for 2 months while you film everything on this one little set. But then there's little sand dunes out back, and they're out there with live ammo practicing. It's like, well, there shouldn't have been any live ammo on the set. That a lot of that is kind of nuts. So they're practicing with live 45s. Keep in mind, though, live ammo or even blanks can still be fatal. If there's an obstruction in the barrel, well, there's still some powder in the blank. And I mean, in this case, it's like the thing was probably loaded with live ammo. But if there's a blank and there's some kind of piece of metal in the somewhere in the muzzle, picks up a rock, something, it's like, yeah, these weird things happen. A 600 feet per second piece of metal or rock will still kill you at 10 feet. It might not have the best, ballistics or whatnot, but it's like, it's still fatal, and people don't understand that about blanks. They still have powder in them. And probably nothing is going to happen to these people. It's a close call. Like, well, did Hollywood learn the lesson about this? Did all of Hollywood come out and say, okay, we're no longer going to use live Liberty devices? Everything's going to be fake. I'm not sure if everyone in Hollywood came out there. So if not, well, then the judge and the DA might want to use this as an example. But even using it as an example and trying to go for the maximum, you're still not going to get an insane amount of time, because it's like everyone looks at it like, this looks like a collection of idiots, and it's just a gang of idiots who don't know what they're doing. It's like, they should have known what they're doing, but it's like, yeah, it's industry standard to be just stupid on the set for a long time. It's like, these are low budget movie sets. This is kind of the way it's been done for a long time. And it's just God's grace that more people haven't been hurt. So, if Hollywood learns a lesson from this, that'll be the great thing. But the other thing is, the Screen Actors Guild, which is the actors union, it's like, they should have been on top of this for a long time. After the Crow movie, when Brandon Lee was injured fatally, he should have been like, okay, well, maybe back in the 90s, the CGI isn't quite there yet. But, at some point between the 90s and now, Screen Actors Guild said it should have been, okay, we're not going to use real Liberty devices on set. Everything has to be a carbon dioxide powered prop or a battery operated prop, so it makes the thing move, and then we'll put the flames in for CGI afterwards. But at some point in the 2000s, the Screen Actors Guild has got power over movies, so they should have come out and said, let's all make this an industry standard. We're just not going to use live hardware anymore. It's just not worth it. But the totality of the situation, look at so many movies were made with real devices, including all the spaghetti westerns, and relatively very few people have been injured. But I also kind of wonder, like back in the spaghetti western days with Clint Eastwood, if people back then were more familiar with hardware, and I don't know if they had a more respectful attitude about it. Because I don't know. There haven't been a whole lot of injuries with it, but it's like, okay, so at least 2 fatalities with the Crow, and with this, it's like, that's probably too many, especially in the days of CGI where you can just make all this. It's like, it's Hollywood. It's all fake anyway, right? Anyway. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.